Hello, welcome to Triple F Podcast, Faith and Family First. Today, we're going to talk with a special guest, and it's about family, how to prepare and how to hopefully preserve and how to create the peaceful end that everybody's looking for. So let's talk about that today with Scott Makuakane. Hey, Eva.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Scott.
Eva?
So, Scott looks like Colonel Sanders, but he's got no chicken. So, Scott's written a book. Now, Scott and I go way back to 1980 when we started law school together. And he's actually been my estate planning attorney since he was licensed and able to do that, which is kind of cool for me to then read a book about it like 50 years later and find out what he knew all that time. But anyway, he's going to share his book with us, and it's packed full of really easy to read, fun to read, quick to read, very extremely helpful stuff about how you're going to have a family later on.
I have got to say, before you jump in and introduce yourself, Scott, tell everybody a little bit more about yourself, that I love this book. I want everyone to know that not only did I read this book once, I read it twice. Yes, I did. And the reason I did, Scott, is because when one reaches a certain age in one's life, one has to think about things that one may not be prepared for.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way that you put this book together, and we're going to make the links available so that if you're watching this, you can get a copy of this book. I'm telling you that anybody can read this book. I read it, and I'm probably low on the IQ poll. Well,
not even. But let me just say, if you can drive a car, you can read this book.
Absolutely. And
With or without chewing gum at the
that's
same
right.
time.
Actually, you probably
No
could do two things
no
at the
chewing
same time.
gum, yeah.
Well, stop. Okay, but the point is that this book is so well done, Scott. I just have to say that it really made me, it reiterated things I already knew, but it also brought to mind things that I maybe didn't think about. And so really thank you for writing this and making it available for us.
Well, thank you. I'm speechless at your praise.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we launch into the book?
Okay, I'm a lawyer. Went to law school many, many years ago with this guy. And
Was Moses in your class?
he was in the class right before us.
Okay,
You know
that's
what? We
I
had
thought.
grandmothers in our class.
We
though.
did. We actually did.
So you were chiseling your notes on, the old way.
Pretty much.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Pretty much. And so I've been practicing estate planning law since 1983. And this book actually was a very long project, even though it's a very thin book. Hopefully it's pithy. Hopefully it's fairly well edited down. But the idea of the book is just to give people the basics of what they would need to know in order to work with their own trusted advisors in putting together an estate plan.
And the name of the book, for those listening on the radio, it's called Estate Planning for Geniuses by Scott Makuakane. And it's estate, EST with an 8.
Correct.
And that's the same. Your website is also estate planning, right?
That's right.
Spelled the same way. So we'll put that link on the bottom for those that want to check you out. So why did you, I know you kind of touched on this a little bit, why did you decide to write this book now?
Well, I've been working on it literally for a long time. Why did I decide to finish it now?
Yeah.
I was inspired by my wife to just get her done already. And that was a big part of it. But it's just something that had been sitting there for a long time and I needed to get done.
Shout out to all the wives that make sure their husbands get their things done.
But I think we passed his background too quickly.
Yes.
Because he's multi-talented. He not only played bass guitar in a performing band, he can build a sink in the backyard.
Because everybody needs a sink in their
Sometimes
backyard.
you do need a sink in the backyard.
Well, I guess you do. My grandpa was an outdoor worksman. He probably would have appreciated a sink in the backyard.
Maybe not the one I built.
The rocks looked very nice.
They did.
All right, so let's launch into this book because it really is a good book. Now, I know that some people listening may be young, and when I say young, I'm not talking about teenagers or whatever. I'm talking about young adults, maybe in their late 20s, maybe in their early 30s, and we probably lost them when we said the word estate. And actually, that was the first question I had in here, because I think that what was really helpful is to, when you got into explaining to people what is an estate, because somebody may be thinking, I don't have an estate. I'm not a rich person. You know, I don't have property, but they may have property that they're not considering.
Well, that's true. Estate is a very broad term. It can be used in a lot of different ways, but estate planning involves a lot more than just your stuff, the things that you own. Estate planning involves putting arrangements in place so that somebody can make decisions for you if you ever come to the point where you can't. And young people a lot of times, feel like they're going to live forever and they're going to be well forever, they're going to be healthy forever. And so they don't consider some of the things that they really should, like having at the very least an advanced healthcare directive, a HIPAA authorization, durable power of attorney. Those are really basic things that really anybody who's over 18 should have in place. And then, we've all got stuff, whether we, think of it as being a lot or not. And it doesn't have to be a lot. If you care about what happens to your things when you go, you really need to make a plan to make sure they're going to go to the right place.
Well, and actually, young people today are having these really weird, very bad medical things happen, whether it's heart problems or blood clot problems or whatever it is. I mean, it's happening a lot to much, much younger people. So if you have kids and you're young, you probably need to pick up this book.
Yes. And for those of you people out there that are like me, that I got corrected but in this book, and so I have to thank you for that. I am a person, as you know, Jim, I like to research things. I love to go out and get everything from the internet, but I also double check my resources. So I was one of those people, and maybe our listeners or viewers, maybe one of you is like this too, where I thought, I'll just download this wonderful little will form from the internet and I will fill it out. And maybe I'll get, somebody at work who's a notary to sign it and I'm good to go. And you actually did a really good job of explaining why not using something you download from the internet is a good idea. So can you touch on that a little bit? Because I think that's a big thing in today's world.
Well, there's a lot of ways to explain that. But one of them is, if somebody comes up to me and asks, could I do open heart surgery on myself? I'll tell them, yeah, you bet you can. Sure, I'm not suggesting you do it. There is a lot to know, and there's a lot you can mess up in the estate planning process. So if you want to try and do it yourself, knock yourself out. But if you want whatever you put together to work, you might want to work with somebody who's done it before and's got some experience and has some training and education behind them. Do it yourself is fine for a lot of things, but estate planning is one you might not want to mess with.
As a practicing attorney, I have had a number of clients over the years that got contracts off of the internet, and they weren't able to read the contract close enough to recognize that there were portions of it that grammatically didn't make any sense because something is missing in the sentences. And that is not what you want. That is not where to start. So I would be a little bit stricter and say, no, not only can you not do open heart surgery on yourself, but please don't do your own estate planning. If you can talk to anybody that knows how to do it, or just read this book. And as a matter of fact, if you already have an estate planner, you should read this book and ask them some of the really cool questions. And if they can't answer it, give them the book. You'll have a better estate planner.
I think so. And I know that for people that are out there that may not know people that are in the legal field, it's so overwhelming for them. And I think that's why the internet looks so promising to them. They're like, well, I'll save money if I just download my own form. But I think you bring up a good point that we're not taught to read things the way that attorneys are. So even if you've downloaded something from the internet and you think it's the right thing, I think that they should still try and find an attorney at least that they could go over. Now, how do you find a good estate planner? With a good attorney, because that's nothing.
Other than dying.
Well, you don't want to wait until you
don't want
died.
to wait that long.
No,
that's when the rubber hits the road. Right?
But that's why even people in their late 20s, right, should already kind of be thinking about this stuff,
kids,
right?
Yeah.
Well, even if you don't have kids, I think that it's a conversation that you should have before things get rough, right?
Well, that's right. And as far as finding a good attorney, it's a matter of just asking around, finding out who other people work with. Do they like the person? And meeting the prospective estate planner and just finding out, do I trust this person? Are they easy to talk to? Can I deal with them? Because there are a lot of really good attorneys out there. Yeah.
There are.
And different people can connect with other different people that they would rather have a connection than just some lawyer doing work for you. So you want that, I think.
And I think there are a lot of attorneys I've seen it. Scott, I know you've done this where you've kind of offered a workshop where you invite people to and you go over all this stuff. Sure, if they want to ask you to be their attorney after that, you're open to that, I'm sure. But that isn't the purpose you're doing it, right? It's more of an education in the community.
Well, that's right. And before COVID, we did it regularly.
Yeah.
And now things have sort of changed. And we're trying to get back into that rhythm again in doing regular workshops, because people find it very helpful just to learn about estate planning. In fact, we have one lady who's come back, maybe 5 times, 6 times, and she tells us, I learned something new every single time I come back.
Okay.
And she's not an unintelligent person. She's very bright.
I went to one of it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and I still have the pen that has the estate planning in there. I replaced the ink with purple ink. So I have this very fancy pen that, has purple ink because, that's how I roll. But okay, so let's, Jim, do you have any specific questions for Scott about the book? Because I know I do.
I will let you ask all of your 8 questions that you've got tabbed over there because I can make them up, but go for it.
No, okay, so you got into that. It was really good. Okay, so another question I had. When you get in here, you talked about, so I do with the Catholic Diocese, I go in and we talk about end-of-life planning, right? And you actually helped us come up with a wonderful advanced directive that Catholics can use. And the bishop has approved it, and this is the one we talk about. But I think that when people are talking about their medical decisions, we're going to get into that a little later because I have a question about that. But I never really thought about having somebody to be there to make decisions on non-medical issues if something should happen to me if I become disabled. And when you got into that, I think that you should probably talk into that because that's another important thing that we may have got all our ducks in a row, maybe, but what happens when we're not maybe able to make these decisions? You talked about a disabilities panel, and I loved that idea.
Oh, sure. Well, the disability panel idea is where let's say you're the trustee of your own trust, which would be very typical. And then you just get to the age where you can't be a very good trustee anymore. And it's nobody's fault. It's just, you can't be a good trustee anymore. And so having a disability panel is having a group of people who can actually fire you as trustee of your trust for your own good. And I've seen it play out in a situation where a senior family member developed Parkinson's, which became dementia. And this gentleman took a very large estate and made it a very small estate with a couple of very bad just decisions. And there was nobody in the family who could stand up to him and say, Granddad, you shouldn't be making the decisions anymore. So if you can, come up with a list of people that you trust enough to make that decision for you, that can be very helpful. And a lot of times people think of healthcare planning as sort of, choosing the people who are going to pull the plug at the end of the day. And in real life, that rarely happens. Rarely does the plug have to be pulled. But it's not uncommon for people to be incapacitated to the point that they can't do things like make good decisions about who their doctor is and maybe even where they live and things like that. So there are a lot of decisions that may need to be made on your behalf. That's awfully good to have trusted people in line and ready to do.
So I have all of our conspiracy theory people are watching this right now going, I know. And these are these people that they're going to come in and they're going to take your land. They're going to take your house. They're going to do all this stuff against your wishes.
If you don't choose the right people, you betcha they will. So, that's the point. See, if you don't choose the people, somebody else is going to choose them for you.
And if you have nothing in place, isn't that even more of a horrendous situation?
It is, because the law sets out sort of priorities for who can be appointed as your guardian or your conservator if you ever need them. But it doesn't say who the best person for that job would be or who you trust the most. Those aren't criteria under the law. It's just, well, it would be maybe, your parents or your spouse or your adult children. But it doesn't categorize them in terms of who's the best, in those lists. So, it just leaves it up to chance, which is not a great idea.
I tell everybody that all the time, especially with because I have 2 daughters. My oldest daughter is not the one, and she knows. that when things happen to me, that she's not going to be the executor, because she's just not capable, and she knows this. My younger daughter knows that she's capable. And so we've already had the discussion, and that's the point I really want to make as we're talking about this, is people should be having these conversations before there's a serious crisis. Because that way you can kind of feel out these people that are in your inner circle, right? To decide, do they have the right qualifications? We're not talking about just knowledge, which they should have. They also got to have the right temperament, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, if you're choosing the person who may pull the plug someday, number one, if you want the plug pulled, you better choose somebody who's going to pull it. And if you don't want the plug pulled, you better choose somebody who's going to, get that second opinion, or, just give you a little bit more time.
Absolutely. Jim, you look, I can see little balls rolling. Go ahead.
No, you
Go
got
ahead.
you got 7 more to go. I'm holding off.
Yeah,
Go
but
ahead.
you're being way too quiet over
hit
there.
your
It
points.
makes me very, very nervous,
well,
okay,
that's
when you're
true.
doing this. Okay.
That's true.
The other thing too, that a lot of people think that if they have this power of attorney, that's going to solve all of their problems. I've had people say that, I have a power of attorney, And you said something in this book that was really important too. You talked about that when people make these power of attorneys and say they decide for whatever reason that they want to change their power of attorney, but they've got all these copies of power of attorneys out all over the world, and they keep changing that person who that is. That is another big warning sign that you said, make sure that you're collecting all of these forms back, right? If you're going to make changes.
Yeah, you got to keep track of that stuff.
And people, I don't think they do, right? Because as you go on in your merry life, and I make Jim my power of attorney, and then Jim moves to New York, which we won't talk about on the show today. And then suddenly I make somebody else a power of attorney, but Jim is still, I have not done anything with that first one. Now I have 2 power of attorneys. I mean, have you seen that happen in your practice?
I have, and I've seen it in even worse circumstances where you have multiple copies of an advance directive out there that name different people.
Yes.
And a lot of times your doctor or your healthcare system is going to want to have a copy of that advance directive, but they don't necessarily make sure that what they've got is the latest, greatest document. And so it is important to keep control over your documents. So I usually tell clients, don't give copies of your advance directive to anybody other than maybe a service that's going to give you access to those documents when you need them.
When we do our trading out there, I always make a joke of it, but it's actually not a joke. I tell them, first of all, what we see in our little educational things is that people will do their advance directive and they will put it in their top secret place.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Great.
they don't tell
That's
anybody
great. So
where they're
nobody knows.
typing. Nobody knows where it is, right? And so that's one of the things they got to do. But the other thing is, I also remind people, they've got to tell people who they've chosen and have that conversation ahead of time, because my mom listed me and did not tell me. And I had no idea that I was, because I thought my older brother would be the one. So when she was temporarily incapacitated, the hospital came and wanted me to sign all these papers. And I said, why are you asking me? Should you be talking to my dad? And they said, well, you're listed. And so I was thinking, so after she got better, I said to my mom, okay, this is a conversation. I don't mind being this person, but you and I have to talk. I need to know, what are your wishes? I need to see your advanced healthcare directive so I can make sure that they follow it. So that's why it's really good that you work with people that have a little bit of knowledge.
And the other thing that I've seen is I got a call from somebody who said, I'm not getting along with this other person who a long time ago asked me to be their attorney, in fact, under their power of attorney. Haven't talked to them for years. Somebody's calling me because they're in the hospital and they're telling me I'm the attorney. In fact, I don't want to be the attorney. In fact. And, if you have something that says you quit, good, but nobody does that. Do people ever I quit being your power of attorney, your attorney, in fact?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when you name someone on the power of attorney, it doesn't obligate them to do anything. They don't have.
But the people at the hospital were really looking for it.
I get it.
Well,
I get it.
and think about that in times of crisis, right? If you've done that and somebody, like you said, doesn't want to do it. I mean, think of the problems that could cause, right? I mean, sometimes decisions need to be made relatively quick, and now there's a snafu in there. So again, it's something to consider as we're doing that. All right, I'm going to do one more, and then Jim is like chomping at the bit already. The other point that I think that we need to make for people is another reason that we really need to have somebody like you guys, well, more him than you.
Absolutely more
when it
him
comes
than
to
me.
estate planning. The reason that we should have someone like you on our speed dial is because of state laws. Somebody could go to New York, which we're not going to talk about in this show. Somebody could go to New York and have...
It's in the book.
They could do all their paperwork in another state and come to Hawaii, and Hawaii state law could be different.
That's right. And that's something you got to be very careful about.
Yes.
So if you move from here to, say, New York, for example.
Which we won't talk about on the show today.
Not on this show. But if you did do that, you'd want to have all of your documents probably reviewed to make sure that there's not going to be any problems with New York law. And there are some, or whatever state you move to, and there are some laws that are so specific when it comes to healthcare laws, for example. So for sure, if you move from here to another state, you're going to need to have another advance directive put together. Maybe durable power of attorney, maybe HIPAA authorization.
Absolutely.
So I would say we're down to like 7.5 minutes. And this book covers so many things. I'm going to throw out a scenario that covers a whole bunch of them, but then I don't want you to answer my scenario. I want you to talk about what you think people need to see on this show today, because you wrote the whole book. But what I really liked about this is the way that you kind of traced from the very beginning of the process all the way through to the end of the process. And it can include, before the person dies, having children, having grandchildren, having a second marriage, which can affect a lot of the stuff, including who's in charge if you need help and all those kind of things. And so this isn't just a book about who am I going to leave my house to, or if I happen to be Bill Gates, who am I going to leave the rest of the world to? It's really about, in my thinking, it's about, look, it's appointed, everybody wants to die, you want to get organized now. And with that, I'm going to say, what do you want us to know about what's in that book? Because it covers everything.
I guess part of the point of the book is that your estate plan is your rule book. And your rule book doesn't have to be the same as anybody else's rule book. And of course, knowing you as I do, your rule book isn't like anybody else's rule book. So, but that's the whole point. You get to make the rules. That's the rule. You get to make the rules. So you come up with the rules about what's going to happen to your stuff. You want to build rules around how your stuff is going to go to the people you're leaving it to. You can do that. You don't necessarily want to give things outright to people. Maybe you want to say, well, this person can get it, but only when they reach age X, or only if they can pass a drug test, or you
by
build
the
the
way,
rules.
my kid's past that age. We got to get together.
Scott, I think you make a really good point, because the other thing that jumped out is that a lot of people, when they're thinking about their immediate family or maybe their grandkids, right? And they're kind of, okay, I'm going to put this paperwork together. I'm going to have all of this covered. I love that you talked about the values that you have, because I'm sure that Sam Walton is probably rolling over in the grave. You know, he made a very big amount of money, left it to his kids, and his kids are now investing in things that he would have never been okay with. So why don't you speak to that about understanding that it's more than just the oldest child or your grandkids? I mean, there's more to it.
Oh, right. And really, you know, people think, well, the oldest child has to be the one in charge when I'm gone. Yeah, maybe if they're the best person for the job. And in a lot of families, they wouldn't be the best person for the job. Or, you know, this is, all the kids have to be treated equally. So everybody has to get an equal share. Well, you can treat your kids fairly without necessarily treating them equally if they have different means or, you know, just whatever. So, again, you get to make the rules. That's the big point, is you come up with what's important to you, and you make the rules that are going to advance whatever you want. And as far as your values, I mentioned, you know, you can say you got to be able to pass a drug test in order to get a distribution, you know, of your share of the estate. So that's sort of a negative thing, but there's also positive things that you can build in. I really want my kids to get an education. I really want them to, you know, get their bachelor's degree. I want them to get their master's. I want them to get their doctorate degree. And you can build in incentives to do all of those things.
You should get this book and read. It's very quick to read. It's actually quite funny and engaging, and it's kind of like you're sitting down with Scott having some great cup of coffee somewhere, and you're just asking him questions because he poses it as like, what questions would you want to ask me?
And let me just let me just be honest and say that when I was reading it, there was a couple of times that I asked the question that you say in the next paragraph. All right, can we stop talking about taxes now? And I had just thought that. So, I mean, just reading it, it really does, like you said, having a cup of coffee. So I love
what is
that.
a QR code behind us?
Well,
what is that?
The people that are watching on YouTube, if they scan that on their phone, they'll be able to order your book, right?
Oh.
Now, and that's what's cool about that. But for those listening, you can get this book. Again, it's called Estate Planning for Geniuses, and that's estate, that's spelled EST8 Planning for Geniuses, and by Scott Makuakane, and you can find it on Amazon, right?
You can. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you can get it.
Is Barnes & Noble, do they still exist?
Yeah,
do we have one here in Hawaii?
I don't know. Actually, there is one at Hawaii.
Okay. All right.
But one other thing I'd like to say about the book. In the very beginning of the book, there's a quote from Albert Einstein that says, "Intellectuals solve problems. Geniuses avoid them." And if you think about it, that is a great theme for estate planning. How do I avoid problems? How do I avoid the situations that I don't want my family to have to deal with later on?
I think you're talking to most of our politicians here in the state of Hawaii. Could we call them geniuses?
Sure.
So in the last couple of minutes, let's say you don't have an estate plan, you don't have a rule book, you die. You've got 3 kids that have issues with each other that are going to have to find a way to work together to deal with your estate. Nobody's going to have any fun. You won't be remembered as fondly as if you got it organized with your own rule book.
And you didn't say the P word.
What was that?
Probate.
Of course not.
Everybody, even non-lawyers, know probate. Some of them think it's a great thing. Oh, I don't need a will. It'll just go into probate, right? And then the state will figure it out.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a horrible thing, but it can.
It can be, yeah.
So I'm a lawyer. I practice law in court. I don't like probate court. It has its own set of rules. I don't want to know.
So what advice would you give somebody, say, in their late 20s, early 30s?
Just be aware that you are mortal. There's going to come a time when you can't make decisions for yourself. There's going to come a time when your stuff is going to go to somebody else, and it may be a lot sooner than you think.
I love that. When I went through your little workshop, you had a little red wagon, and then you put the stuff in the red wagon. That was like a great. So now, what advice would you give somebody older, maybe somebody in their 50s and 60s?
Really, basically the same. Have a rule book. Have some set of rules in place that are going to take care of your things, that are going to put a decision-making process in place for you.
And I would say, and I'm not even an attorney, but I would say if you already have an estate plan, I would say that you need to review it constantly, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because things change.
Yeah. I mean, we all know what happens when water flows into somewhere and then doesn't go anywhere, right? It ends up stagnating. We don't want a stagnated estate plan. So, any final thoughts, both of you?
Thanks for being here.
Oh,
I've seen you in a little short period of time. It's nice. Thank you.
It's great. Thank you.
If you want to learn more about Scott Makuakane, you can visit his website at
estateplanning.com, spelled EST, the numeral 8, planning.
And we look forward to seeing you next week. Make sure you like this video, share it, subscribe, hit that notification button so you know every time we upload a new video. And we will see all of you next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.
Ahui ho.